I just have one announcement, and I'd just like to mention something else. For those that are being confirmed, the confirmation robes are in the library. If you could try it on, and then if it doesn't fit, then let me know, either now or at 1 o'clock when we have the practice. Something came to my attention. A number of people contacted me this week, and then there was an article condemning the Congregation of Mary Immaculate Queen. So I just wanted to explain it, and it was more than one person, so I said, okay, let me explain it. First of all, it's very important that we stay, especially in these times, that we follow church law, that we stay balanced. We don't go to one extreme where we're too strict or we're too lax, that we just follow what the church teaches. And I don't know if you've ever read this book. It's by Patrick Henry Omler. He's passed away, but he wrote this in the late 1960s, and it was a classic because it led millions of people away from the new church to realize that the English Mass the new Mass was invalid. But I remember offering Mass in Australia. I went there twice, and then met with him, and he was talking about theologians on the internet, and he said somebody that he knew, he asked him a week before, what is the sacrament? So for those who are being confirmed, you have to know this. Okay, what is the sacrament? The sacrament is an outward sign instituted by Christ to give grace. And then there's 7 sacraments: confirmations, 1 baptism, Holy Eucharist, penance, etc. So anyway, so we asked this person, what is a sacrament? And he didn't know. And then the next week, he's a theologian on the internet, a great theologian. And he didn't even know what a sacrament was. So there's an issue about the words in the Mass. Now, there have been 3 periods of time when there were several years without a pope. So after the death of Pope Marcellinus, there was a vacancy of 3 years, 7 months, and that was in 304 to 308. After the death of Pope Clement IV, there was a vacancy of 2 years and 9 months. That was in 1268 to 1271. After the death of Pope Nicholas IV, there was a vacancy of almost 2 years and 4 months, from 1292 to 1294. And in the altar missal, when we begin the canon of the Mass, the very first prayer, the priest prays, Unicum famulo tua Papa Nostra. And what that means is, Unicum is together with, or one with, thy servant, our Pope. And then you list the name of the Pope. And then in the front of the altar missal, in the Roman numerals, small Roman numeral 38, it says what to do. It says, where it says, Unicum famulo tua Papa Nostra, and then the letter N, you list the name of the Pope. You speak the name of the Pope. But when the chair is vacant, then these words are omitted. So, and then it's interesting, you list the name without the number of the reigning Pope, and then you bow your head slightly toward the missal by pronouncing the name. It says, if the Holy See be vacant, he omits the word Unicum, etc. So, as traditional Catholics, I believe that the chair of Peter is vacant, but there's a number of traditional Catholics that aren't sure, they just don't know what. But they know Vatican II is heretical, the new Mass is wrong, and they just want to be Catholics. So I've never required anybody coming to church here to reject Francis or these false popes. and then I've never refused the sacraments or said it's a mortal sin if you don't believe what I believe. It's confusing. So, but it has become an issue, and then I said I got this, these number of people contacted me, and there have been a number of priests that say it's a mortal sin if you attend a mass and the priest says the words Unicum Papa Nostra, and then they put Francis's name. And St. Augustine wisely said, what those sins are that exclude from the kingdom of God, in other words, mortal sins, is most difficult to determine and most dangerous to assign. Yet he spoke of certain crimes such as adultery is obviously mortal. St. Raymond of Pennafort speaks in the same sense. Be not too prone to judge sins to be mortal when you have not the fullest evidence. And St. Thomas Aquinas, it's dangerous to decide what sins are mortal unless we have positive teaching to guide us. So what has happened is there's some people who are rigorous in it, and this person who was condemning the Congregation of Mary Immaculate Queen said if somebody, there were too lax on this issue, and that if you don't say it's a mortal sin, if a priest says this and deny people the sacraments, if they go to a Unicum Mass, then there's something wrong. So, but I think that's extreme. So I believe heresy separates us from the Catholic Church, but there's some place at times where people don't have an opportunity to go to a sedevacantis priest, so they need the Mass and the sacraments. I'll just real quickly explain what the laws of the Church are. For one example, as I said, I flew to Perth, Western Australia, and they pronounce it Path. There's no R's, like shock, not shark, it's a shock, so it's Path. But anyway, I went to Perth several times, and I'm thinking, wow, this is a long way. The flight from Los Angeles to Auckland, to Sydney is the longest flight in the world, and then it's another 5 hours or so to get to the other side of Australia, Perth. So I'm thinking, is there no other priest available? But what happened is maybe every 3 months a priest in the United States would offer Mass for these good Catholics, but there was another Latin Mass, was a valid priest, and he offered the Mass in a cum. So Father Stepanek wrote I knew him in Ohio. He was a Franciscan priest, a doctor of sacred theology, and a very holy priest who didn't go along with Vatican II. And then he says, he read this article where they said it's, if you say Mass Unicum, you attend it, even if there's no other Mass to attend, it's wrong. He says, if we try to use the words of the Pope, again, we're not talking about Francis or something like that, true popes. If we're trying to use the words of the popes and pre-Vatican II theologians, as already quoted above, and make them say that attendance at Unicum Benedicto Masses, at that time was Benedict, is absolutely forbidden under any and all circumstances, it is we who are really doing the kind of forbidding, not the popes and the pre-Vatican II theologians. Because he goes on, just try to find anything in the popes and pre-Vatican theologians that totally and absolutely forbids any and all attendance at Unicum Benedicto Masses by traditional sedevacantis Catholics. It just isn't there. And then, I don't know of any older traditional clergy that we've ever worked with. Bishop Gerard de Laurier in France, Bishop McKenna, who ordained me, Bishop Carmona from Mexico, Father Stepanek, Father Oswald Baker, etc., who taught that it's a mortal sin for sedevacantists to attend the Unicum Masses. And the bishop wrote a little thing to explain this. He said, although the Congregation of Mary Immaculate Queen does not accept Francis as a legitimate successor of St. Peter, it does not consider such traditional priest who offer the unicum masses as schismatic. For example, the Society of Pius X, if they're validly ordained priest. And then, for such priests were schismatic in the canonical sense of the word, then they would be required upon their recognition of the vacancy of the apostolic see to abjure their error and be received back in the church. Nevertheless, it has never been the practice of any traditional bishop or priest to require this abjuration of error of any priest who at one time mistakenly recognized Francis as a true pope. So again, I remember speaking to a very good priest, an older priest, and he was saying that at that time John Paul II was the worst pope. He was a rat. He was the second worst pope in history, and then Paul VI was the worst. And he was saying that Luther, John Paul II was saying that Luther was a great theologian, but he just could not make the break and say that he's not the Pope. And it's confusing. I remember talking, another priest I spoke to, he said he was going to pray for the Pope that he's converted and becomes a Catholic again. Very confusing. This does not mean that the Congregation of Mary Magdalene Queen in any way endorses the theological contradiction of those priests who maintain that Francis is the true Pope. Last, we exhort the faithful to use great discretion when they approach such priests for the sacraments. This is especially true in regard to their children, who may be confused by their erroneous opinions on the papacy and on the infallibility of the church. So in other words, if they walk in the church and they got a picture of Francis, then it's confusing, and then they say he's a heretic. And so the mind of the church is that the sacraments were instituted by Christ for our salvation, and that Canon 2261 reflects the minds of the church. There's over 2,000 laws of the church, and Canon 2261 says this: an excommunicated person is forbidden licitly to consecrate or administer sacraments and sacramentals except as follows. And then it says, except as provided in number 3, and we'll talk about number 3. The faithful can, for any just cause, ask for the sacraments or sacramentals of one who is excommunicated, especially if there's no one else to give them. And in such cases, the excommunicated person so asks may administer them and is not obliged to ask the reason for the request. So, if the church says, and the church allows, if the faithful need to receive the sacraments, let's say go to confession and there's no one else available except an excommunicated person, that in such cases they may administer the sacraments, the person may receive them, and the excommunicated person is not obliged to ask the reason for the request. But from an excommunicated vitandus, in other words, someone who's declared excommunicated, or one for whom there's a declaratory condemnatory sentence, the faithful may only do so in danger of death, ask for sacramental absolution. So what, as I was saying, it's the mind of the church, the sacraments were instituted by Christ for our salvation. And if the church, if someone has nowhere else to go, there's no other valid priest, there's no other valid sacraments, then they could go to a priest even though he's confused about the situation. And if things were so clear-cut, why didn't they bring this up in the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s? That it would be wrong for anybody to attend a unicum mass. I mean, I've never said unicum mass, never. Until we get a real pope, okay, then it'll be a unicum. But I haven't said it in union with any of these. And it's not just mentioning the name of the pope, because it shows a unity of belief that I'm offering this mass because I believe the same way the pope believes. it's a unity of belief, worship. I worship together with him, and then I also accept his authority. But still, according to Canon 2261, a person still would be able to receive the sacraments. And what I said earlier about a mortal sin, what St. Thomas Aquinas, St. Augustine, St. Raymond were saying, there has to be some real clear proof that something's a mortal sin before you forbid the sacraments and demand it of the faithful. And if something took 20 or 30 years to determine it was a mortal sin, then that just isn't the way it is. Of course, when he's talking about a validly ordained priest, he's using a Catholic rite. He may be mistaken on the papacy, and but you're in a unique situation. It's very confusing. There's nothing officially declared. I believe it's not a mortal sin. If there's no one else available, they shouldn't be denied the sacraments. And the supreme law is the salvation of souls. So basically what the bishop was saying is he doesn't recommend people to go to an unliquid mass. He doesn't forbid it, because the church law doesn't forbid it. But you have to take necessary safeguards. And then based on the teaching of St. Augustine, St. Raymond, and St. Thomas, unless there's clear proof that something is a serious matter, a mortal sin, we should not demand it of the faithful. Furthermore, if this matter were so clear and obvious, why did the older clergy never hold this position?